Hello, welcome back. We are here for Off the Shelf Book Talk with Book Lovers. I'm Elizabeth Nelson here with my Aunt Kay Johnson, and we are continuing through our post-lockdown selections and new books we've been reading. So, Kay, do you want to start us off?
Sure, I'd like to talk about. I'm all about series for some reason. As I look through this list of books,
Well, it's really hard though to find a book that's not in a series anymore. I'm amazed looking through my list how many books I read that are standalone. So I kind of wonder if I just started doing that.
Well, I don't know that I set out to read series, but on Amazon, it'll give you recommendations.
Oh, yeah.
If you read, X, they'll give you Y and Z. And I think that's how I found a lot of these,
okay.
one after
Yeah.
the other. But I'm a fan of Laurie King. Have you read any of Laurie King's? She writes about Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes.
It sounds familiar, but I can't tell if it's familiar because I know the name from working at the library or from seeing stuff online, or if I've actually read anything. I would need to consult the Goodreads.
Mary Russell was Sherlock Holmes' ward.
Okay.
And then they ended up getting married. And so she's like 30 years younger than he is.
Is this post Eileen?
Yes.
Okay.
And
Irene Adler, not Eileen, Irene.
Irene Adler.
Yes.
And they're good. They work well together. And there's, I think, 14 books or 17 books in the series. There's a lot. I have not read them all.
Okay, I was going to say, did you read all of these ones?
No,
during COVID
I
too?
read a couple of them, and a couple of my favorites was Locked Rooms, which takes place in California.
Okay.
And then the other one is a brand new one that just came out this summer, I think. Castle Shade. And that's a fun one because it takes place in Transylvania. And they're hot on the chasing Dracula.
Okay. Dracula gets around, man. He's everywhere.
And it's I thought it was interesting, and clearly there wasn't truly a Dracula.
Yes.
But it was an interesting read, and
Okay.
I kept at it because it was a real book, and I would put it down, and then I'd pick it up, and I'd put it down and
Okay.
pick it up, but I stuck with it, and it's good. So I would recommend, if you like Sherlock Holmes, which I do, this is a nice twist on that genre.
Okay. Well, following your book, I also read a book, the last book in a series I've been working on that also involves the Count Dracula. He shows up in this one too. Theodora Goss has a series called The Athena Club, and I've talked about it before. They're all the daughters of the different horror genre. Dr. Morneau, Frankenstein's monster, all those girls. So the book that I read is called The Sinister Mystery of the Mesmerizing Girl. And this is from how it wrapped up, I'm thinking this is the last book she's writing in it.
Really?
Yes, which is kind of sad, but this book follows the girls of the Athena Club are looking for, they thought that when they were running around in the last book, saving Lucinda Van Helsing from her father, their maid Alice was kidnapped. And it turns out that Alice was not Alice. She, of course, is some other mystical person that they were supposed to be hidden with them. And so she also is this same kind of breed, this magic powers and all that stuff. And so they're trying to track her down and trying to save the Queen of England, because this is in England, and Sherlock Holmes is in it too, actually, because he's missing. Dr. Watson is missing. Dracula's running around trying to run.
My goodness, they just pulled them all in.
It's really funny to see all of these people because they've just decided they all live in London together. Because Mary, who's in this, she works for Mr. Holmes, and nobody knows where he is. And then you've got the Baker Street boys who work for him, the irregulars, running around causing problems. But how they ended it, I really think that she might be done with it. Just how it kind of wrapped up and listed all the members' names at the end. It was kind of like, I think I'm done with these girls, and I don't know how I feel about this. I really liked them. I could have been friends with them in real life, maybe, or they would have eaten me, one of the two. But so it was just Theodora Goss She is a professor, and she spends half of the year in the United States and the other half she teaches at a college in Budapest. So a lot of her books, they can have a little bit more of like a scholarly, like she'll talk a bit more about like Buddha and pest and the
sure.
stuff that's been going on around there in some of the books. So some of it can get a little,
Traveloggy.
yeah. Well, I mean, and there are other books that are like that too. Like I kind of found The Historian by Elizabeth
Yes.
Kostova. It's a really good book about her mother goes missing and her and her father are tracing Dracula. And that one too, though, that's like post Cold War, and so there's a lot of heaviness in that too, with them explaining the different what happened to the buildings, and that one got a little heavy too. But I suppose I should have understood it probably would be, since the name of the book was The Historian.
Yeah.
Probably a little heavy on the history, but
Theoretically.
but I mean, even though the book had a little scholarly feel, stuff still moved, which was nice. I don't mind it's kind of like with Eric Larson. I like that I'm learning something, but he lets you learn and you just keep moving.
Moving, right.
So you never really have that point where you're like, I am reading 50 pages about some party in the corner of this world and I don't need to know about it. But
Right. I don't
So-
need 50 pages.
yeah, so I was sad to see that one end. It has its permanent little place on my bookshelf now where they'll just sit, and I'll go back and see them again someday, maybe.
It's always nice to revisit old friends.
It is. Or to have the option to go back and see them, which I kind of like. I
Yeah.
have some that are up there and like I have a spot on my shelf where I have like my original Harry Potter books, and then I have like a new set that I bought after I had Alex, because I'm like, now he'll have a new set I can read through with him. So I have 2 copies of all the Harry Potter books, but it's like, well, I don't want to get rid of the ones I read, even though they're these nice new copies, because it's like
You have to get some for Archie.
he and Alex are going to have to share.
That's what happens to
Yeah.
those that come after the firstborn.
Well, I mean, like with the original ones I have of the Harry Potter books, all of them except for the very first one are hardcover. But I won't get rid of the paper book copy that I have, because that's the one I got that started that whole Harry Potter journey. And I mean, the book, it's the binding is cracked. There are pages that have been taped in it, but it's not going anywhere.
When you talk about Dracula, my friend Debbie introduced me to a series called the All Souls Trilogy by Deborah Harkness. And there's 3 books: The Discovery of Witches,
Oh, okay.
Shadow of Night, and The Book of Life.
I've heard about them. I haven't started them, though. I don't
They're
think.
they're good. I was
Okay.
amazed at how much I like them, because the protagonist, she is a Oxford scholar who's a professor, and she's in England doing additional research. And she crosses paths with the vampire. And of
As
course,
one does in England.
unlike Dracula, these are sophisticated vampires who have blood banks that they can tap rather than you or me.
Okay. Are they like the Twilight vampires and sparkle in the sun?
They're out in the sun.
Okay. Well, Tom would have problems with these then, my husband, because he goes, vampires who go in the sun should burst into flame. He
They're
goes, no
supposed to.
vampire should sparkle or any of that.
Well, you know, I was raised that vampires had to be under dark, the dawn, they're buried or they're dead, or they burst into flames. I'm with Tom. But I'll tell you, it doesn't work with modern literature.
Okay.
So these vampires can do just about everything. So it's interesting because they kind of cover all the bases. It's modern, then there's a time travel,
Okay.
and then there's sort of a bring it all together.
Okay. Nice.
But if you enjoyed it, it's also a TV series.
Okay.
And season 1 and season 2, I believe you can borrow from the library.
Okay.
Season 3, I think, will be coming out on DVD,
Okay.
I think. But I would recommend them if you have an interest in what kind of fiction is that?
It's like a supernatural.
Supernatural.
No, there's a name for it. What is
Fantasy?
it? It's something realism.
Well, I'm calling
Yeah.
it supernatural.
I'll figure it out for the next time we do this.
Supernatural. It's definitely supernatural.
Well, if we're going to stick in the supernatural realm, I have a couple I read that'll follow us along in the story. I read Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. And so this book it follows a family that bought this old house with a haunted reputation because there's been a few different instances of people dying in the house. And so the book goes between current day and back to, it's sort of so the family lived in this house, experienced many, many things, and then all up until one night where they packed up and left all their stuff behind. And then the dad went on to write a tell-all book about what happened. But then after they moved out, they never talked about what happened to the daughter. So she doesn't remember anything. And then after her father dies, she finds out that he never sold the house and he kept it. And so she goes back to the house to try to figure out what in this book he wrote was real or if it was all made up. And really good, creepy.
Is this one you read with the light on?
There you go again, Kay. I did, well, no, this I read with the light off because this was ebook and I was reading it at night while I was feeding the baby. So I read it with the lights off because I'm not going to turn the lights on in my bedroom at 1 o'clock in the morning. But really good twists, some good twists. I did enjoy it. Some parts of it took me a second to figure out where I was. Or I had to kind of figure out what they were referencing because some people I got kind of transposed. But did really like it, really quick read. I did just get another book from them from Riley Sager at the library called Lock Every Door, and I think it's a similar premise. He also has one called The Final Girls, and it's that one is about there's 3 or 4 girls that are all victims who have survived serial killers. Mm-hmm. So they make up the Final Girl Club because they were the final person before the serial killers got caught. And somebody starts picking them off. Is the premise of the Final Girls. Oh, what
a cozy read.
So I know. That book I am on hold and it says I will get it in about 4 months.
Wow, popular.
So apparently Riley is very popular. So I read that one and then I also read The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James.
Okay.
Which is a girl, I think it's her aunt, moved away to go to college and was working at a hotel to make money and one night disappears. And so her niece now goes and tries to figure out what happened.
Okay.
And gets a job working the exact same night shift that her aunt did. And strange things start happening at the hotel. So it's another one of those, what happened kind of, is it a haunting? Is it something else going on? Because nobody really stays at the hotel. And it's sort of off on its own trip. And so are these real people? Is it a ghost? What's happened? That one again, couldn't put the book down. And that's been a really popular one this year with online and people talking about it seems. So that was really good. Do I have any other haunting books here? I don't think so. Do you have any more supernatural books or are we moving on to a different genre?
I don't have a supernatural really, but Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child write individually and as a duo. And their duo books, one of their protagonists is Pendergast, who's an FBI agent.
Yes.
And anyway, his books can have a supernatural over.
Yes.
Because Pendergast's family goes back generations.
Okay.
And he's got a lot of serial killers in it. Like his aunt.
Oh, his family?
Yes, his aunt,
my
his great aunt is in a home and the door is locked and she poisoned her whole family or something.
My God.
But he goes and visits her every now and again because she has a lot of good insight.
Okay. Well.
And he's got a brother who's completely off the rails. A genius, but dark, very dark. And then he's got a ward was fed some type of compound from like 1860
Like a
and
super serum.
yeah, super serum. And
superhero
she's
book.
been living in the basement for like 50 years. And so she just like saw the light of day recently.
Oh, no.
So it's sort of one foot in each court, but they're good because Pendergast is such an interesting character.
Yeah.
And their new book that's coming out in August, I think is called Bloodless.
Okay.
And they're finding bodies with the blood drained out.
Oh, goodness.
Which is a true supernatural twist. So
That
we'll see if
is, yes.
Dracula happens to be in the neighborhood or if it's some pseudo vampire.
Yeah, I do have one more on here I just noticed. I read this is one I saw everywhere, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by
Yes.
V.E. Schwab. So I thought this was a really interesting take on a book because it sort of switches up the really long the long lifespan, the supernatural one where you can live, people who live forever. So this is based on Addie, or Adeline was her name before all of this happened, makes a deal with a supernatural god being, they don't really say what they call him, that she doesn't want to be stuck in just the simple life where she lives on a farm, is married, has kids, dies, doesn't see anything, or leave her town. So she makes a deal with him for more time, but because he's kind of a trickster, he switches it so that if she's with you, you'll see her, but the minute like you leave the room or she leaves the room, you instantly forget her.
Ooh.
So like she can meet people and become friends with them, but like if you were talking with her, you got up, went to the bathroom, came back, you'd have no idea who she was.
Wow.
So it's her, and so the book follows her through all the different time periods, what's going on in Europe, going to America, and she goes into a bookstore one day, and because nobody sees her, she doesn't really pay for things, and so she just tries to walk out with the book, and the guy behind calls her on it, and then the next day she comes back to try to sell the book back, and he says, "What do you mean you tried to steal that yesterday?" And so after all this time, suddenly someone remembers her.
Why?
And you have to read the book and find out. I'm not going to ruin it. So then it's figuring out why after all this time this person can remember her, and also going through, you find ways that she has. And when you're a person that can't leave a mark on anything, how you leave your mark on history. And she did find ways to do that. So it's interesting to see how they circle all that through the book and how she finds a way to turn the tide in her favor at the end of the book. So that I did really like, and I wasn't sure because, sometimes when you get books that are so hyped up, you read them and then you're like, nah, but this one did live up to its hype. And I thought it was a great a different take on that kind of story, which I really liked. Another one I read that just was more of a heartstring, kind of just a feel-good book was My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry.
Oh, yes. Now, I have
Yes.
not read that, but we ran a review of that in the paper.
Yep, so it's by, I think it's Frederick Bachman. He wrote, Britt Marie Was Here, A Man Called Uwe.
Yeah.
And those books. And so this is the story of, it's a young girl who lives with her mother and stepfather and in an apartment complex, and was always with her grandmother, and her grandmother would tell her all these stories about this kingdom when she was scared at night. And then she would say they would go to this magic place, and it's all this stuff that happened, and her grandmother dies, and after she dies, the granddaughter starts getting these envelopes, and she has to take the envelopes to these different people, and she has to tell them that her grandmother says she's sorry for something that happened. And as she starts to meet these people, she starts to realize that the people she's meeting are people from the fairy tales that her grandmother has been telling her about.
Oh, wow. So they're
And
real
all
stories.
of the people, and they all live in this house, this apartment complex with her. And so it helps, and so the book really helps. It's like brings her, like her and her mother are at odds, and so it kind of brings them together. And just like there's a guy in it, she calls him Wolfheart because that's the fairy tale character. He is severe OCD, clean freak, so like he's constantly washing his hands and like trying to pick up dirt, but he's this huge like Hagrid looking guy, and she's obsessed with Harry Potter. She's always talking about Harry Potter, this little girl, and there's a giant dog that's involved, but there's all these different people that live in the apartment complex, and it's how they all came there and how they're all connected to her grandmother. So
Interesting.
yeah, and it was really good, sweet book. Some other aspects to it, but I mean, she does good things, and I really enjoyed it. That was the first book I've read by him. I
Okay.
haven't read A Man Called Uwe or any of those, mostly because there are very long waiting lists for them at the library right now. So, I just haven't gotten around to this yet. But that one I really did like. It was really sweet. Another one I liked that was really sweet was called The Lending Library, and that's by Eliza Fogelson. And this is about a girl who's always found shelter in she loves to go to her library. She has her chair in the library, and she'll sit there all afternoon and read. And then the library pipe bursts, and they find asbestos in the ceiling. So the library has to shut down and be completely redone. And because she feels it's so important to her city, she sets up a lending library in her back room of her house. And so people start coming to her house to check out books. And it's how kind of this quiet girl who wanted to hide in the library kind of comes out of her house, and all these different people that come and meet her. So that was really nice too. I enjoyed that one.
I'm going
I
to
have a
jump
thing
in.
for
and-
library books. Yes, I should let you do some talking too. I'm doing all the talking here.
It's okay. I was just going to say one series that I read that I really enjoyed was the Longmire series.
Okay.
And it's a TV show.
Yes.
Walter, he's a sheriff, and Walter Longmire. And what I really liked about the books was the guy who plays the TV character is a really good representation of the guy in the book.
Oh, good.
So it
That's always
transferred
good.
well. The only thing I would say is that the books are more humorous than the TV series.
Okay.
The TV series is a little darker than the books are good. The TV series is a little dark.
Okay.
So that's one I would recommend. I want to say maybe 14 books in the series. Another one that I'm reading, which I find really interesting, is called the Lanny Budd series by Upton Sinclair.
Okay.
And he's a Pulitzer Prize winning author.
You
And
write
these-
The Jungle?
Yes.
Okay.
And these books take place from the end of World War I to after World War II.
Okay.
And there's 11 books in the series, and they're long books. They're like 700 and 800 pages.
Okay.
But Lanny Budd is the protagonist, and his father owns a airplane manufacturing company.
Okay.
So he's big time stuff. And Lanny's parents are divorced, and he's lived mostly in the south of France with his mom
Okay.
for years. And he's well connected, and he has lots of money, and he's charming and good looking. And
As they
he
always are.
becomes a spy for FDR.
Okay.
And so you find him in Nazi Germany rubbing shoulders with the Third Reich. You find him in Northern Africa.
Okay.
You find him in the south of France. You find him in London. You find him in New York. And what he is FDR's eyes and ears.
Okay.
And because of who he is, he masquerades as an art dealer
Okay.
that has no political leanings. So he's sort of a dilettante, and he tends to flutter around, but
Yeah.
what he's really doing is checking out everything for FDR. And it's really interesting. If you have an interest in World War II, Upton Sinclair does a fantastic job
Yeah.
laying the groundwork of how different things were done and why they were done, and so on and so forth. So if you have an interest in that period of history, I highly recommend the Budd series or Lanny Budd series by Upton Sinclair.
Kind of sounds like the male version of Maggie Hope. A
Yeah,
little bit.
yeah.
And the new book in that series just came out, The Hollywood Spy, and I haven't read it yet, but I'm like, because I don't own the rest of the books in this series because I've read them all through the library, but I'm trying to like not buy it, but I might have to.
It's because the line's so long.
Well, not only that, but I really like that series. That's Susan McNeil, and I really enjoy Maggie Hope.
Yep.
Maggie Hope. I want Maggie Hope to be my friend, because I think she'd be fun.
Yeah, but she's also really creative too. I mean,
Yes.
because she originally started out as a secretary.
Yes. And now
She was a mathematician, right? Isn't that her background?
Yes. And then, well, she was a mathematician in the U.S., and then her grandmother dies, so she goes back
Right.
to England.
And she ends up being
has
a
to sell it.
secretary.
Yes, for Churchill.
Because that's what women did.
Yes.
And then one of the guys who works with her.
Her friend David is like Churchill's private secretary.
And who figures out she'd make a great spy?
I think just Churchill figures it out.
Okay, I know because
But,
that's what
yeah.
ends up. But there's some really good dark stuff in there, and,
Yes.
and
Yeah, no,
Maggie's
she
a
goes
really, to me, feels like a real person.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where when you watch like biopic movies, you can kind of pick out, like if you watch like a movie that's based on real people, you can kind of find people that Susan McNeil might have like pulled inspiration from kind of around him, which I think is interesting. But I just don't know. I've been buying a lot of books lately.
Well, Maggie
don't
Hope
leave
would
my
be a
house.
keeper.
Yes, that's true. It would be. But then it's one of those things where it's like if you buy the newest book, do you then need to go back and buy the rest so that they all
Are they
can be there?
paperbacks?
I don't know.
I don't
But
know either.
I've been reading them all on my Kindle, so I don't know. But, you know, I don't like to just have like the 10th book in a series on my bookshelf. I'm going to have it on my bookshelf. I either want them all or I don't want to have any of them. I'm a completionist. It's a problem. But we are all out of time for this week.
And we still have more books.
I know. I still have. I'm looking here. I'm like, oh, I still have like 6 books I could talk about. But we'll save those for next time as we keep working through these lists. If you have anything, again, if you think any comments on anything we've read or anything you want to see, reach out to us on Facebook, Instagram, or our email, offtheshelfbooktalk@gmail.com, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.